the companies have more and more power to decide what can stay up and what must be taken down. They take advantage of our desire for ease, our resistance to effort, our resistance to challenge, and I think over time, if we're not already there, it will interfere with our ability to have critical thinking. It interferes potentially with our ability to be challenged. To the extent that we're limiting expression, we're also limiting challenge. We're limiting effort. People shouldn't be surprised if in the future there's less information available to them, less edgy, less provocative information available online. And I think that we will be a poorer society, we'll be poorer societies for it.
We stand for connecting every person, for a global community, for giving everyone in the world the power to share anything they want with anyone.
There are now 3 billion people around the world connected via social media. But who decides what this world is permitted to see?
Controversial commentator Katie Hopkins has been permanently banned from Twitter after breaking the site's hateful conduct policy. Hopkins was suspended for a week in January this year after a series of hateful tweets. The 45-year-old has more than 1 million followers and has tweeted in support of far-right figures such as the English Defence League. Twitter has not confirmed what tweets were responsible for the permanent ban.
But what we're talking about here, Manila and Ben, are statements that might be hateful or incorrect or spiteful or injurious to the soul. I've never heard anything like this in my life. Isn't that the whole purpose of what free speech is about? The marketplace of free ideas? So this has no place in the world of law in terms of what they want to ban.
Facebook, which has 2.6 billion users, brought in nearly $70 billion in advertising revenue last year. The civil rights organizations are counting on major brands to join the temporary boycott to force sweeping changes, including that Facebook stop generating ad revenue from misinformation and harmful content, automatically remove all ads labeled as misinformation or hateful, and automatically flag any extremist content in private groups for human moderators to review.
Our task is to monitor and moderate the user-based content. I help people. I stop the spreading of child exploitation. I have to identify terrorism, have to stop the cyberbullying. Algorithms can't do what we do.
You start with the question, what's the vision for what should be on your platform? What isn't appropriate? What don't you want in your community? And there are choices in that, right? Like there is a choice to say, I'm going to not let anything go up before I review it. That's a choice. Or I'm going to permit most things and only review the things that are complained about. That's also a choice. When your value is around allowing more expression, allowing this sort of democratized platform to really live, then I think you go with the more liberal policies.
In a statement, Facebook responded, writing in part, "Our focus is to act on what is most important, removing hate speech and content that harms communities. In the first quarter of this year alone, we removed nearly 10 million pieces of hate speech. We have made progress, but there is still much more to do."
Why do a pause of advertising? Why not just walk away from Facebook advertising?
But Google, not being a public good or utility, doesn't that give them the right to allow whomever they want to be able to earn money through their platform, the thumbs up or thumbs down?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there's a certain level of irony built into this story because, remember, President Trump issued an executive order recently that would remove Section 230 protections from tech companies like Google and YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, meaning that those companies could no longer be shielded as they are now from content that's placed on their platforms. Google says, hey, that's not fair. We're a platform. We're not a publisher. And yet they're acting exactly like a publisher by going in and saying, we will remove you from being monetized on our site. And here's the other thing. I love what Lionel said about the issue of what exactly are you removing and trying to save and protect the world from? Are you saying that websites cannot have readers and users who have opinions that Google doesn't agree with? And if you do have those viewers and readers, you must prevent them from speaking or commenting on a story in a way that Google doesn't like. That is insane.
When you open the floodgates and you ask the entire world to broadcast yourself, upload your life, share everything that you can think of to share, people respond. People with all sorts of motivations and interests and desires respond. When Facebook or Google claim that they don't have any employees in Manila, they can legitimately do that by using the labor of a third-party outsourcing firm. It's true that the paychecks don't come from Google or Facebook. They come from an outsourcing firm based in the Philippines. Commercial content moderators labor in the shadows of social media platforms, out of sight and out of mind, actually unknown to the millions of users of the platforms who've never given it much of a thought, who does the cleanup work on their platforms.
Yeah, Lionel, bigger picture here. Google is essentially the internet, right? The internet is our reality. If Google or Facebook or any other major platforms continue down this path of indirect censorship, what might be the ramifications on our society, Lionel?
A complete and total shutdown of free speech and the exchange of free speech and ideas. Look, imagine this, Manila and Ben. Let's assume, going back to the days of newspapers, imagine I made this ink and I was an ink company, and this ink that I happen to use was used by 99% of everybody in the newspaper business. But I'm just a private industry. But it just so happens that the thing that I produce is responsible and used by 99% of all people who want to engage in speech. Do you think this idea that I'm a private concern, that this argument would fly anymore? Absolutely not. It's specious. And by the way, what are we talking about? All of this indemnity on the part of Google. What are we protecting them from exactly? This I'm not sure. I can use my imagination, but they've never really explained to us exactly what it is they're being shielded from. I mean, a libel, slander per se, or just nasty talk?
So this is the school, and the airstrike was in the school area, so the neighborhoods around it. Without our work, the armies would have, or the governments would have a straight pass without anybody challenging them. There would be, I think, more civilians getting killed. There would be less closure. We would not be able to know what's going on. These videos are needed. These videos are part of the war. They provide information. They provide evidence for the future. But the problem is these videos are quite often classified as ISIS videos. It's been seen that this is very graphic, so they get deleted. Now, the censorship that's taken place on YouTube, it's affecting a lot of organizations with a lot of videos about Syria and airstrikes and destruction. And they had their account suspended. Our life is different from here. We have war. That's very important reason why the content is different. The war and airstrikes and killing, that's what we would focus on. That's what we're gonna report about. We would report about football activities, or let's go to this place for brunch. No, unfortunately not.
In all of human history, no single entity has ever had more control over information than Google does right now. So if you're worried about the concentration of power in the hands of a few unaccountable actors, and you very much should be, nobody has more unchecked power than Google does. This afternoon, NBC News decided to use some of Google's power to shut down a couple of its competitors. Power is useful for that. An NBC employee called Adele Macomo-Fraser forwarded Google executives a screed from a left-wing activist group in England denouncing two sites, Zero Hedge and The Federalist, as, quote, racist. Google immediately took the bait, of course. The company threatened to ban both news organizations from Google's ad platform. In other words, to cut off their revenue. Adele Macomo-Fraser was thrilled by this. She immediately fired off a victory tweet boasting about the censorship she had inspired. She called the two sites far right. That's a term that has no meaning but does suggest some kind of immoral behavior that Adele Macomo-Fraser disapproves of. So what did Zero Hedge and The Federalist do to deserve this, to be demonetized? Well, we asked Google, and they told us that the two sites maintain unmoderated comment sections. In other words, readers get to say what they want. Google finds this intolerable.
There's this code of silence in Silicon Valley. Everything is always presented in a very varnished, manicured way. Everyone's killing it. Everything's going great. Every plot is up and to the right. Negatives in general are just not talked about. At least when I was there, the workforce at Facebook was very young. And if you're young, you don't really have draws on your time. You don't have a wife, you don't have kids, whatever, right? And so there's a lot of people who kind of semi-lived at Facebook. You were encouraged to hack the world, however possible. No. Facebook is fundamentally a tech company, right? It's run by engineers. It thinks about product. It thinks about infrastructure. It thinks about scale. It thinks about the user experience. It's not a media company. It doesn't think about content or content creation or content editing or curatorship. It is just not part of its DNA. Whenever Facebook has been confronted with, hey, you have a responsibility to this thing, their response is, we just do math. We have this algorithm, and we give you what you want, and we edit almost nothing. But the political reality is, after Trump, after Brexit, that answer kind of isn't quite good enough anymore. And yet I think we're reaching the point where the public just won't accept that as a reality. And at some point the government will step in, right? And I think they understand that.
SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, is a great example of that. They've created themselves as the arbiter of what is a hate group. Now think about this. Yes. So all of a sudden, through this weird kind of a quasi-legislative judicial imprimatur, we are now making these people arms of not really the government, but arms of the conscience of the world.
Well, you're right. You're right. Well, it's about branding.
This is nuts. Yes.
It's about branding. The one in the UK is called Center for Countering Digital Hate, and they're the ones that have a hand in all of this. So it's you put the word hate in there, so they're there to counter it, Lionel.
But hate is a relative term, guys. Hate is a relative term, and hate speech is relative.
All of this raises an interesting question, though. Google says it now holds conservative websites responsible for the comments of their readers. And yet, irony of ironies, thanks to a special carve-out Google has received from the United States Congress, something called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, remember that, Google itself is not responsible for content on its platform because the Congress says it doesn't have to be. So if you're slandered by someone, for example, and that slander passes through Google servers, you cannot sue Google over it. Google is immune from the consequences. Immunity is a very nice thing to have if you're a big company. Fox News doesn't have it. But again, thanks to Congress, Google does have immunity, and that's one of the main reasons that Google's founders are some of the richest and most powerful people in the world.
Facebook removes everything and anything from their social media platform when Turkish authorities ask them to do so. Political speech or content of a political nature is, in most cases, the main subject for these removals. I'll show you some examples in terms of what is being subject to blocking or removal. Photos burning the Turkish flag, a Kurdistan map, caricatures or cartoons mocking Erdogan. Whichever platform you look, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, Turkey is the country which restricts more than anyone else across the globe. Turkey has always been a country of censorship. The traditional media is increasingly controlled by the government. So Turkish people have been turning to social media platforms, but now they're constantly pressured by the Turkish authorities to remove or block content. These companies started to do deals with the government authorities because none of these platforms want to be blocked completely from Turkey, because then they would be losing users and business.
To an unprecedented extent, Google controls reality. Now, Google has already shown a disturbing willingness to distort reality for ideological ends. And now it is happening. Google is acting directly to shape what people can say and what they're allowed to speak. It's a direct effort to stifle free speech. All of that is even truer today.
These are really backroom deals that the public doesn't have a lot of information about. When these governments, in a kind of back channel way, go to the companies and say, we want you to restrict this expression on your platform, it will push companies over time to make these decisions on their own. And they have to make decisions about what the law means, so that the companies are deciding what's lawful and what's not, what's illegal and what's legitimate. And that outsourcing to companies, I think, should be really quite disturbing to people in democratic societies.
The United States is so politically polarized that, someone from the sort of blue end of the spectrum can't even have a conversation with someone from the red end of the spectrum. There's lots of reasons for that. I don't think Facebook created this, but I think Facebook definitely amplifies it and makes it worse. It used to be the case that every citizen had a right to an opinion, and now every citizen has a right to their own reality, right, to their own truth, to their own set of facts. And Facebook very intentionally flatters those sets of facts by showing you, what you want to hear, effectively, and effectively filtering out what you don't want to hear, by and large.
I grew up life-changing with Lenny Bruce. The bit he did in '61 here in New York, I have to point to it to have to go read it. People read it. It changed my life about everything.
Of course.
About how it was amazing. I grew up on Richard Pryor. You can't even go back and talk about the book he wrote.
Yeah.
And then what I got to do sometimes is explain, which I hate in big arenas, that this is a thought police thing, and I do not like it. But when I use these words, this is my intent behind those words.
Yeah. Wow.
So as long as you understand my intent, I still get people, well, just don't say it. And I said, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, but they take it out of context and put it on Twitter or put it on Facebook.
I'm surprised they haven't. I'm surprised they haven't, because I do use some provocative words, but I tell them it's words that really got from my parents.
Yeah.
They said this stuff, and we talked about it. I can't even say it here. I can't even point to it.
Yeah.
It is an alarming thing for comedians.
Well, one of the misconceptions is that human nature is human nature, and then technology is just this neutral tool. It's not amplifying anything. But this is not true, because technology does have a bias, and that bias that it has a goal. It's actually seeking a goal, and the goal it's seeking is what will get the most number of people's attention. What tends to work on billions of people at successfully extracting their attention out of them and keeping it. And not just getting the attention, but then getting them to share things. And so it turns out that outrage is really good at doing that. Whether Facebook wants to or not, they actually benefit at getting more attention when they show feeds that are filled with outrage, versus if they said, let's not show those things. It amplifies that which is most divisive, that which is most outrageous, that which is most fearful. The whole environment tuned to offer us the worst of ourselves.
It takes courage to choose hope over fear. To say that we can build something and make it better than it has ever been before. You have to be optimistic to think that you can change the world. We do it one connection at a time. One innovation at a time. Day after day after day. And that's why I think the work that we're all doing together is more important now than it's ever been before.